to talk to on this than Dale Vince, founder of EcoTricity, who I would imagine, Dale, couldn't be in more disagreement with the head honcho from Shell. Afternoon.
The afternoon, I think that's fair to say. I mean, look, he's in a glass house throwing stones here, because Shell spend about 1% of all of their capital expenditure, which is the money they invest in new stuff. They spend about 1% on renewable energy. So when he complains that the world isn't moving fast enough, Shell aren't moving fast enough by a very long way. And to point the finger at China again and say, look, increased demand from them, blah, blah, blah. They just hit 50% green electricity on the grid, and they've installed more solar panels than the rest of the world put together.
But they are still the dirty old polluters, aren't they, Del? Come on. I mean, these are the people that are chugging it out like there's no tomorrow. They're doing stuff we gave up doing in 1973, for goodness sake.
They're doing the stuff that we say we're going to do, moving to green energy rapidly. They're beating their targets. They're going to beat their targets by 5 years. We are missing our targets probably by 10.
But But their targets, though, their targets. I mean, come on, they're making their own. They're marking their own homework here, aren't they?
Their targets are bigger than our targets, and they're hitting them. And remember, it's a country of over 1 billion people. You know, we're just 60 million people. You know, it should be easier for us. By the way, all of the stuff that we're building, I mean, not just in renewable energy, but so much of the stuff that we have comes from China. We have therefore exported our carbon footprint to China. So when we look at them and say a quarter of the world's emissions comes from that country, that's because a lot of the world's stuff comes from that country.
This is very true, but nonetheless, I mean, the big bad boys on the block are not us. They're places like China. They're places like India, right?
No, I disagree. You know, we've got to take care of our own emissions, put our own house in order, or we have no credibility on the world stage when we're encouraging other countries to get to net zero. And this government have taken us in the opposite direction, away from the pledges that we made at Paris in 2015. Drilling for oil and gas now is crazy. There is no shortage of oil and gas in the world. What the Shell man said is deceptive. Nobody's talking about cutting production. We're saying don't drill for new oil and gas. Let's use what we've got in the transition to green energy.
He runs one of the biggest oil giants on the planet. So, yes, he has a vested interest, but simultaneously, he seems like quite a wise bloke, seems like quite a friendly chap in that little interview we heard there. He says it would be dangerous and irresponsible. You're dangerous and irresponsible, Dale, essentially. You're advocating for something that is irresponsible. You're going to cause a problem, not solve one.
Yeah, and he says we're desperate for oil and gas as a planet, as a world, but we're not. We're desperate to get off of it because it's created this climate crisis, which is, you know, is just going to change everything. It's going to, I mean, a little bit of disruption that we talk about from Just Stop Oil from time to time is nothing compared to the climate crisis. The coronavirus was nothing compared to the climate crisis. We know it's driven by fossil fuels. The international political scientific consensus says we have to stop drilling for new forms of fossil fuels. So when that man says we shouldn't cut production, he's being just a little bit disingenuous. Nobody's calling for that. We're saying don't find any more of the stuff. Let's rapidly transition.
But if he were to say something like this, I mean, I know you're calling him out here, but his point would be, well, hang on, I wouldn't be so stupid as to go on global television and say something if it was demonstrably untrue. So either he's right or you're right.
Yeah, it's like a subtle shifting of words, isn't it? You know, this is why it's deceptive. To talk about not cutting production. Nobody's calling for a cut in production. It's a silly thing to say. It's a wrong thing to say. It sets up the wrong argument so that he can give his right answer. It's wrong. We aren't talking about that. We're saying don't drill for new stuff. Let's use what we have to rapidly make the transition to a green economy.
We need, of course, some form of fossil fuels to run the very things that you want to convert to, right? I mean, if you're talking about wind farms, there is a component required in the fossil world to make those things work. If you're producing solar panels, there's a component to make those things work. So we can't do without it.
Yeah, and there's no contradiction here, right? We live in a world dominated by fossil fuels, but we have to use those fossil fuels now to transition to green energy. There's no contradiction there. It absolutely is the way that it is. And it's a good use of fossil fuels to build the stuff that we can power ourselves on forever from renewable energy without pollution.
What's going to happen to us, though? I mean, we must use less of everything than we used to use. We recycle like mad. We have different ways of driving cars. Even the cars that are using petrol and the like are built and engineered in far more considerate ways. We construct buildings in different ways. We have lower speed limits. I mean, this place environmentally must be unrecognisable from 10 years ago. And I wonder if what happens here, Dale, the hippie fraternity, of which you are proudly or have been in your past one of, kind of almost double down. When the figures look good, that's not good enough. We need more. And we are doing well. We're doing better than we've ever done, surely.
We are, but we aren't doing anywhere near enough to get to net zero anywhere soon enough. And that's based on the science and our own commitment to targets at Paris in 2015, when the whole world signed up to target 1.5-degree global temperature rise, which has dangers in it itself inherently. But currently we're on a trajectory for 3 degrees, which is madness. 4th of July, which was a couple of days ago, the world recorded its hottest average temperature ever recorded, 17 degrees average across the planet, including a lot of cold places. You've got to bear that in mind. We just had the hottest June in Britain ever on record. And in March, we had the wettest month for 40 years, the wettest March for 40 years. So freak weather is with us now, but it's just going to get so much worse on the trajectory that we're currently on. We know that fossil fuels cause it. We have to stop fossil fuels.
I mean, stuff or incidents that normally take, you know, hundreds of years to be able to establish patterns are all happening within hours or days of each other at the moment. You see, that makes people rather cynical. Many people just say, that's called the weather, Dale. You know, 76 was a hot summer. Lots of other times it's been cold and horrible. I can remember in the 1980s when it rained for about a month. A friend of mine came over to play cricket from South Africa in the 1970s and couldn't play for 6 weeks because it poured hard every day. And then the year later it was rather sunny. We've always had these moments and we always have these records.
Yes, understood. These are anecdotes and they don't add up to data. Any number of anecdotes doesn't add up to data, but we do have data that goes back a very long time in terms of world weather records. And of course, we've been tracking the climate crisis for probably 60, 70 years with some intensity. And it's a clear pattern. You know, we just had the wettest March in 40 years, and we've just had the hottest June ever in our country, you know, within a few months of each other. It's a very clear pattern. It's happening globally, and we know that it's caused by fossil fuels.
So
we simply have to accept that.
But what's going to happen? I mean, if we cut all the fossil fuels, we have no extreme weather like that.
Well, you see, this is the false argument that the guy from Shell has set up. We don't need to cut all fossil fuels. We need to stop now drilling for more oil and gas and then make this rapid transition with what we have, invest it in the building of a green economy so that we can power ourselves from the wind and the sun completely and forever. We'll have clean air as a result, clean water. We'll have permanently low energy bills, will eradicate fuel poverty and create hundreds of thousands of jobs in our country and make our economy so much stronger. Before the energy crisis, we spent $50 billion a year buying fossil fuels to bring them here just to burn them, a single-use fuel. That $50 billion can stay in our economy. It's $1 billion a week. It's like the Brexit bus slogan, except it's 3 times bigger, and it's true.
In terms of what's going to happen then, if this sort of Armageddon scenario unfolds, Dale, I mean, what are we looking at? Okay, we might get more rain, we might get more sun. It's hard to keep up with which. But what are the devastating kind of things? How is it going to affect Bob in Arbroath's life day to day?
You know, it's not my favourite topic, Ian, because it sounds like doom-mongering, right? You know, if you start to list all of the things that we're told from the modelling are going to happen, then it sounds like scaremongering, doom-mongering, and that's not what I'm about. But we're talking crop failures, we're talking large parts of the world that become uninhabitable for people. We're talking mass migration of tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of people. We're talking sea rises, the flooding of coastal cities, all kinds of stuff. The loss of sea ice completely, you know, is another problem. The impact on wildlife is a big deal. But in terms of cost of living and disruption to our daily lives, off the scale, nothing that we've ever seen before will come close to it.
So this is... it becomes an unlivable planet or just a hotter, sometimes wetter one?
It'll begin with large parts of it becoming unlivable, and if it goes unchecked or if it reaches a runaway trigger point, then, you know, where we get some kind of positive feedback loop, then the whole planet becomes unlivable. It's entirely feasible that it becomes unlivable for human life.
I'm not going to challenge your knowledge on this, Dale, but I will. This is something that I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will be thinking of. If you go back through the old newspapers, you can go back to 1870 or something, you know, whether it was in Australia, the United States or over here. We've had those predictions before. You know, we've got 10 years to save the planet. There's going to be inclement weather. There's going to be terrible floods. It's the coldest this, it's the hottest that. Why is there that sense that many people reasonably have that, hang on, you know, you guys have been prophesizing this kind of doom for years and it never happens?
Well, I'm not sure that 100, 150 years ago, people were saying we've got 10 years to save the planet. I don't think that's true. But definitely, people were saying if we keep burning all of these fossil fuels in these volumes, it's unprecedented, it will affect the climate. And I think over that period of time, since 100, 150 years ago, we've begun to see that happen. We can see it happening now. We are having extreme weather. The UN says that 4 million people have already been killed by the climate crisis globally. And we can see that 20 million people every year are made homeless by the climate crisis. These are real things. I'm not saying we're going to die if we don't fix this in 10 years. I'm saying if the climate crisis gets a proper grip, then the planet could become uninhabitable. Large parts of it definitely will be uninhabitable. And
quick question from Chris, who says, please tell Dale that well over half of China's electricity comes from coal. China emitted more CO2s in the last decade than Britain did since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Stick that up your Chinese fanboy kilt, I think is the message there, Dale.
Yeah, well, look, we're 60 million people right there, 1.1, 1.2 billion people. Is it really a surprise that they have a bigger carbon footprint than we've had, ever in our country's history? Not to me. The per capita emissions of China, that's the per person emissions, are a fraction of the emissions in Britain. And they have reached, refresh your news, whoever it was that said that, refresh your news, because they have reached 50% installed capacity on the grid from green electricity, and they announced it last week.